Back in the day, when custom tattooing was still in its infancy, one man would assert his vision on the world. Like the master of a respected dojo, some artists leave an impression that few can forget. Working quietly, their work and dedication to the craft produces a level of perfection and creativity that floats above all others. Competition? What competition?
John's draws circles around me. You know, he's an excellent artist, really good concept of layout and everything.
I mean, I'd seen Hardy's work, but it was, I still, and no disrespect to Ed at all, but John's, I think, was 2 or 3 steps above a lot of that work that Hardy was doing at the time.
If there's any tattooer in Canada that's had like mythical standing, it's John. You would hear John's name, you'd hear the Dutchman's name everywhere. You know, someone's uncle got tattooed by the Dutchman, it was the best tattoo. You know, guys are traveling from all over the world to get tattooed by this guy, the Dutchman. And he's a myth, he's a god in tattooing for us.
Jesus Christ, he could tattoo. He was coming from a whole other thing, almost like, it was like classic European art history or something, you know, the Dutch master, you know, so.
His artistry is just something else, you know. He was very, very, very technically advanced.
John's portfolios, you know, they're out on display. It's also easy to get completely overwhelmed and shit kicked emotionally as an artist when you look at them.
Like, am I supposed to stop tattooing? Because if this is what I'm supposed to aspire to, it's not gonna happen. You know what I mean? Like, honestly, that's what his tattooing made me feel like. It was just mind-numbing. Some of the tattooing that guy was producing, man.
So I think John's influence on tattooing on the West Coast comes from his illustration background. He brings a sense of scale and movement to tattooing that a lot of tattooers weren't understanding at the time. So everything is placed on the body for a reason, and it's about form and it's about fit, movement. So when you see a piece, a lot of tattooing is really heavy, really graphic. John has this ability to do that, but mix it with airiness and etherealness, that the tattoo has movement and it breathes and it's alive. That might be something more people do today, but back then that was not a thing. Like, he really brought that to tattooing, and it became a hallmark of West Coast tattooing, this movement, this flow.
This guy is so good and so far above the curve. I mean, even on that level of where Ed was, like him and Ed were kind of...
In the 80s, John was doing work that you didn't see anywhere. Like, there was guys like Ed Hardy that were doing mind-blowing stuff, and it had movement and energy. But John was able to really refine that and really make it a, perfection.
John always brought a more artistic game to his tattooing with composition and layout and things like that.
His concepts on flow and composition, and just all these things that he breaks down almost into a mathematical concept where anybody can understand it if they look into it.
He would just like grab somebody's arm and start twisting it, and okay, flex, and see where the muscles would protrude, and he'd be like, okay, cool, like there's this bump on your arm, cool, we'll put the forehead of the dragon there, and then where it dips down, you got, and then the nose where it protrudes, it would all sit with the muscles, and that's the thing about John's work especially that would really make it come to life, just the way he would fit it on the body and work with the lines of the body and just do everything laid out in a way where every way you moved, it was alive,
His influence is understated. His ability is probably not understood by most tattooists. He really is an artist who elevated tattooing.
It was so evolved. It was so much more technically evolved than what I had seen anybody else doing.
When you're around somebody like that, it's hard to be not intimidated by it because he's a brilliant artist, I'd still, to this day, I'll be doing something and I'll think, well, John says, or John wouldn't do this or whatever, because he tells you. And when he talks to you, he talks really quietly. And you have to lean in to listen to him, and he's got those piercing black eyes. And you listen to him, and he fucking burns that shit right into your brain when he tells you. And you don't forget it.
Achieving mastery in one's craft would be enough for most, but nurturing and building the next generation's powerhouse tattooers is a legacy that continues to grow. This quiet master left a huge impact on his students. So Dutchman's was an interesting shop, I found anyway. From my experience visiting it, it was very much, you had a teacher, and then you had a bunch of pupils. It was, most shops you have a bunch of misfits that come together and work together, and you maybe have a boss, maybe you don't. You know, Sacred Heart, it was just a bunch of guys coming to work together and trying to make stuff work. But Dutchman's was interesting, it had a structure. You had John, who had all the knowledge, and then he attracted and handpicked really talented young people.
Every morning, everybody was at their drawing tables and then bouncing back and forth between drawing tables, helping each other out and stuff like that. And then, you know, and then John would come in and everybody have their drawings ready, almost like teachers here now kind of thing. And he'd come over, and if somebody was stumbling on something, he'd come over and do a redraw or help us out, you know?
And we're trying to do our best job on every tattoo, whether it was a tribal sun or a dolphin or a portrait or of all the different things that came in. You're always, you know, your comrades are going to be looking over your shoulder, and we're always checking each other's work out. So it was a pretty driving environment.
When I worked with the Dutchman, he was such an amazing teacher, and it was lessons every day. I could learn from him and pick his brain, and it's really important. But he's an amazing teacher. The way he had a way of teaching you that, for me, it connected really well with simple words and movement of hand to paper. He just showed me lessons on color composition, line weights, talking about placements on canvas, achieving depth, different theories of art. That I don't oil paint, but he'd bring that to the table in tattooing and show you in examples. And I think I left there starting to scratch the surface.
No matter how far behind he was, he'd always stop and do a layover or give you a pointer. If you ever wanted help with anything in regards to tattooing or drawing, he was always ready there to help you out.
I mean, when you would get lessons from John, it wasn't always at the appropriate time. You would be like halfway through a tattoo and he'd be starting to tell you what you could have done better maybe. But
there's a lot of honest criticism and a lot of help at the same time amongst all the artists. So we all learned off each other. We all brought new things into the shop as well. So we could kind of see the shop grow.
You know, when John would pull you aside and like sit you down and give you some drawing tips, man, it was like, you fucking pay attention, you know, because he didn't repeat himself, and he would, you know, he would always sketch shit out for you. But that was the great thing too, was he would pull you aside and he would pull you away from your client for an hour sometimes and just really go through stuff and explain it to you, you know, and be really thorough with it, you know?
He was the Ed Hardy of Canada. You know what I mean? He was that mentor to the artists of tattooing. Going to work with John, you probably learned so much fundamental stuff that you learn how to break stuff down and then rebuild it. And then coming out of that, your own style. Clint Danroth. Like, nobody tattoos like Clint Danroth. Clint Danroth tattoos like nobody. It's new school, it's cartoony, it's Japanese, and it works.
Dustin's one of the few artists that worked at Dutchie's that also worked at Paul Jeffries' shop. And Paul left his mark on Dustin for sure. But one of the things he always wanted to do was to go work with John because his dad had been tattooed by John. He was so eager to learn. He went in every day. He basically burnt himself out trying to learn as much as he could from John, working hard every day, long hours, like all those guys did. And Dustin's work was, you know, again, his own style. It had that really strong influence from Paul. But then you see this John Dutchman flow and movement just refined a little bit more. You see a little bit more openness, a little bit more breathability and lightness in the tattooing. It was really interesting to see that.
I didn't know Rob Hope until Dustin Kroetsch Bones told me, look again. And then I looked, he's like, no, you're not looking. Look again.
Hands down, Rob Hope is number one. It's absolutely his. You cannot look at his stuff and see that he's got influence from John the Dutchman, for sure. but I can't see influence from anybody else. He is him. He does his tattoos, period, end of story.
Rob's tattooing was also funny because Rob also had a very different outlook on tattooing. I was very much more it's a technical application, it's not art. And he was very much it's an art. Fuck you, period.
But he would like work out all of his light and mid tones and then like really build his shadows, and that for me was pretty cool because I'd never really seen anybody, it was always like single pass outline, black, color, and just seeing him build it like a painting almost, and in the end they would leave with the most insanely detailed pieces, and the craziest flow and his water, man.
He's one of the unsung heroes of Canadian tattooing for sure.
Jesse Young, he's the mechanic of tattooing. He builds machines, so that's kind of where that comes from. But I even think his approach to tattooing is he's got all the parts. He knows how they all work together. And doesn't matter the style, he just seamlessly is able to put them together. Not a lot of people can work in and out of different styles and make it all work. And he's able to do it. It's crazy. And sometimes it's hard to even tell that it's a Jesse Young tattoo. You're like, what? How did you do that? Because I know you do this, but you do that too? Oh, okay. Ryan Halter, traditional American tattooist. That's what he wants to do. That's all he cares about. Goes to work for John, and John's this illustration master and imparting all this knowledge. And I can only imagine how tough that was for Ryan, because he'd be constantly at odds with what he wants to do. But somehow the two of them find a way to make it work for Ryan. And Ryan ends up coming out of there with this original style like nobody else's. Sure, it's based in traditional American, but it has movement. It has understanding of how things work on the body. And if you ever take a look at his Japanese stuff, which he doesn't seem to do enough of, it's mind-blowing.
You were gonna learn something. Every day you went there, you were gonna learn something. And Rob Hope actually cautioned me once. He said, don't listen too close to John. He'll teach you so much about art that you won't be able to enjoy it anymore.
You can't not progress in such a enlightened way working there.
And when I looked at the other artists that I was working with, people like Dustin Kroetsch and Clint Danroth and Ryan Halter and Rob Hope, I could see them putting those lessons to work.
If it wasn't for the Dutchman, tattooing would not be where it is today, And there's very few people you can say that about, really, in the tattoo world. But he had a huge influence on everybody. It's just you can't help but be influenced by him.
talking in your sleep. Said I